Thank you very much, and thank you, Joan, for inviting me to come to share with you this morning, and for Pastor Eve for allowing me to come and share a little bit about the adventure that God has had me on for the last 10 years or much longer. I know that He's been working in my life to prepare me for such an endeavor as this. I was telling the table this morning that if anybody had told me that I would be speaking in front of a room full of pastors and missionary people, I would not have ever believed it to be so, because I was always a Martha, not a Mary, so I was a behind-the-scene person. But God has opened many doors for this ministry, and with the recent flood, it has been something that has made the planning and the preparation that we've had over the last 7 years to be real and to be tangible, and to see if truly what I feel that has been the structure was really tangible. And just before I go into the presentation, I want to thank so many in Edmonton that have helped Albertans and helped Calgary and High River and the Siksika Nation and so many other areas that have been hit so severely by the floods. And I know I've been working on the donations aspect of this, and so many calls have come from Edmonton saying we're wanting to donate, we're coming down to help, what can we do? And so we've been very touched by the outpouring of love from this city down to Calgary and abroad. And I just had an email yesterday actually from a girl that wanted to donate a Chesterfield, and I said, yes, we have a place that needs a Chesterfield right away. And she said, well, actually, I live in Edmonton. She said, give me time to get a truck down there to get it to you. So this is the kind of thing that I'm dealing with that has both touched my heart, but touched the hearts of those that are receiving the love and donations that have been coming forth. Let's get this thing going. Here we are. Thank you. So I'll just share a little bit. Joan and I talked a bit about what maybe would be the best thing how to sum up 7 years of work. I've been doing Bridges of Love for 10 years, but the focus on the emergency aspect of it has only been for the last 7 years. And it is quite a story, and I wish I had more time to share really how deeply God has ingrained this into me. But as you can see from the photo, I have always said that I'll never give up, and it hasn't been easy. I can tell you that a lot of eyes have glazed over the years, and people have said to me, they've called me Noah. There's been a lot of articles written about the work I've been doing, especially through the H1N1, and everybody says, well, Marg, you're wasting your time. Why would you be preparing for an emergency? We never get emergencies in Alberta. And so this has been something that has been hard to get across, that it isn't about emergency preparedness, it's about an outreach opportunity. And caring for our communities is what we're doing by opening the door to say we care about our neighbors and we want to get to know you. So if we do ever have an emergency, we'll be ready, and you'll feel comfortable to come and knock on our door and ask for help. But all this got started 7 years when a doctor saw the website. I was working on the Micah Challenge for the first 3 years of the Bridges of Love, and was taken under the Evangelical Ministry to be their compassion track coordinator, and it opened doors at a national level, so that I was traveling around and getting to know a lot of people at a national level right at the start. And the Micah Challenge at the time, how many are familiar with the Micah Challenge? Nobody? It was started by it's a global initiative. It was to fulfill the Millennium Development Goals. And so I was going around and working on poverty issues with mobilizing churches for this. And a doctor in Burnaby, Dr. Tim Foggin, saw the website, and he asked if I would help mobilize Canada to be ready for a pandemic. And with my medical background, I thought, well, maybe a pandemic is what God is leading this ministry to. So I dropped everything and left the Micah Challenge and left AFC's roundtables and decided to go into this full time. And at this time, I was working on charity status, and we were able to get charity status, I think, because of the focus on pandemic was kind of unique, and not too many people were focusing on this, and I think the government knew that there was a blank that we needed to fill. So that's Dr. Tim and I wrote a discussion paper together that's still on our website, and it kind of gave a template for churches to use to start looking at how they could be prepared. And the reason that Tim was passionate about this was he was in Shanghai during SARS, and he saw the devastation that SARS created and how quickly this erupted. And he has a twin brother who's a biologist in China, and at the time he was watching the progression of the avian flu. So between the two of them, they said, we're overdue for a pandemic. We have to get Canada ready, because we know that if there's a major disaster such as a pandemic, that the normal avenues for emergencies will not be able to look after the needs of the people that would be sick. So that's how it got started, and right away I knew that I didn't want to forge out on this on my own, that I wanted to be connected with the emergency people. So we had a summit in 2008, and it was on pandemic preparedness, and we invited the national leaders to come, or the regional leaders to come to this summit. And I had 16 speakers from around Alberta, and one, Danuta Skoronsky, was a epidemiologist, and she came and spoke, and we got to meet many through this summit, and we formed an advisory council for the Faith Emergency Preparedness Initiative, which is Bridges of Love's initiative for the emergency work. And this advisory council have members from all the different areas of emergency preparedness. Public safety were actually the ones that introduced or got me started with the different agencies, and they were very supportive, giving one of their people to attend our meetings once every 3 months. So we have connected with Edmonton. Mike Cook has been my connection, and he said he would like me to come to their emergency on the park this summer, so that I feel the doors are starting to open, and with you inviting me here now to start to branch out from, I've been working mainly in Calgary, but meeting with the representatives across Alberta, so they are very well informed about this initiative, and know that there is value in having the churches mobilized and ready to respond in the event of a major disaster. And this isn't saying that it has to be a major disaster. It could be anything that could happen, that if once we get those connections made with our communities, it could be a death in the family, that somebody that doesn't have anybody, doesn't have a church, that they will be comfortable to come and knock on your door and say, I have an emergency in my own family, and could we talk? So it's just a little bit to open our door and say, we're there for you. So that's a bit of my journey. And this is, Oswald Chambers is one of my favorite authors that I read every morning in my devotional, and he said, it is easy for us to imagine that we will suddenly come to a point in our lives where we are fully prepared, but preparation is not suddenly accomplished. In fact, it is a process that must be steadily maintained. It is dangerous to become settled and complacent in our present level of experience. The Christian life requires preparation and more preparation. And if you relate this with what I'm doing with emergency preparedness, you need preparation. It's not going to happen if you think that when a major disaster comes, you're going to be all of a sudden ready. It's not going to be so, because it does take some intentionality to put your plan into some sort of order. Effective preparation of any kind requires a clear understanding of the goals we hope to achieve. In the case of disaster preparedness, the primary goal is to minimize the impact of a crisis, whether it's a house fire, pandemic, earthquake, flood, or loss of a family member or cherished pet. And we know you don't have to plan for a tsunami. We'll never have to worry about that here, but you have to look at what you might be dealing with. And I can tell you, I never thought we'd be dealing with a flood of this magnitude in our province. When we had our summit, Brad Andrews was one of our presenters, and I captured this little quote that he said, that minimizing the impact on society, are there pieces of this puzzle that we haven't figured out? And this was 7 years ago that we had the summit, and I think it's becoming clear to me. I said to Joan that last year at Mission Fest, I've been going for I don't know how many years, maybe 5 years, and had the same messages in different themes each time, but I felt this year it was crystal clear to people. People would come up and we'd talk, and I saw the light bulb come on for the first time this past year, and I think now with the flood we might have a few more light bulbs come on. As followers of Christ, we also are called to the greater mission, and I'm speaking to the choir here. You all know the verse, but I think that love one another has been the new command is something that we have somehow overlooked in our years of as being Christians. And there was a book that I read that was called The Love Revelation, and the whole book is on how Christianity has missed the new command, I give to you, love one another. And I think this is where the love component is the key. Without love, we can help and serve and do all these wonderful things, but we aren't going to hit the mark if we don't have that component of love. This is a picture of in High River of a car floating down, and we all feel compassion for disasters that have happened in other places. And as we see from the media, there's disasters happening all over the world, and never before have we felt so connected with the things that are happening, just because of the way communication and media and how things are brought to us immediately, that we do feel more connected with these disasters. But I can tell you, I'm sure that not too many of us in this room have really gone through a major disaster such as they have experienced in other countries. And our flood, even though it was a great disaster for us, is nothing compared to what other people have gone through. This is one instance that happened in November a year ago. We had a horrific windstorm. I don't know if you had it up in Edmonton, but it was it was like a little mini hurricane, and it was actually blowing the windows out of the downtown core. And that was my first call that I received from the Calgary Emergency Management Agency. They called at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they said, "Marg, do you have a church in the downtown core that could act as a reception center? We're going to have to evacuate a lot of the people that are living in these high-rise apartments." And so I got on my in my database and started looking, and I only had 2 churches in the downtown that were part of our network. And so I called them, and I couldn't get an answer. And at that time, my form did not have a 24-hour contact on it. And so this was a lesson that I learned from this, is that we have to have a 24-hour contact for every church, because you don't know when the emergency is going to happen. It's like when your kids get sick, it's always at night. So we have to be prepared. And I started calling around to other churches in the downtown core. I looked in our Good Shepherd's Guide and started calling churches in the downtown core. And guess what? Everybody had answering machines that said our services are Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And do you think one had an emergency number on it? Not a one. So this was lesson number 2 that I learned from this experience, is every church should have an answering machine that says, if you are calling in hours that are not where somebody is there to answer the phone, please call this number. We have a 24-hour person on staff that will answer your call. And I think every church needs to have this, because your own church has your little emergency books or your own phone books that have your numbers, and they know who to call, but people outside your church don't know who to call. And this is an important thing, that if somebody is trying to get hold of you in the night, they should have a number to call. This is another picture during that windstorm. It knocked over trees that you'd never think would have knocked over in Calgary. But there's a famine much closer to home, a famine that destroys the inner nature of people. While people's physical bodies deteriorate and die from lack of food, people's souls deteriorate when deprived of the vital food vital to every human being, and that is love. So, are not Christians and churches the bastions of love today in a troubled and loveless world? Surely, if any person or any institution should know and practice love, it is the Christian and the church whose master taught that God is love and commanded love one another. So the definition, I brought Dr. Charles Arnn up to Calgary the first year I was doing Bridges of Love, and he gave a seminar on love. And the book that he wrote said, love is intentionally doing something caring or helpful for another person in Jesus' name, regardless of the cost or consequence to oneself. And I think that was important to me for during a pandemic when people are contagious, and are we going to have enough love in us that we aren't going to be afraid to go and to help? During the Roman Empire days when they had a lot of pandemics and epidemics, it was the Christians that stayed behind and cared for those that were sick and dying, and they often got sick themselves. So it does take a great love for God that we're not afraid to go and help others. Joan, could I please get some water? Thank you. Thanks very much. So Bridges of Love's twofold mission is to focus on the individual Christian and church member who is called by Christ to be his vessels of love, and to focus on the local church, which is also called by Christ to love. Bridges of Love's vehicle to open the door and carry God's message of love to our communities is through emergency preparedness. Faith is not about trusting God to provide light when we find ourselves in darkness of a crisis. Faith also means preparing before the crisis comes to carry God's light, which is what we're talking about.
Could you take out the mic or get closer to it?
Sorry. I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. Our human reaction is to escape or to build walls of protection around ourselves. When our health or safety is threatened, God's call is to be wise, but also to follow Jesus, who gave his own life in service to others. The Faith Emergency Preparedness Initiative mission is to display the love and lordship of Christ, serving the needs of our community during an emergency with coordination, integration, compassion, respect, confidentiality, sensitivity, responsibility, and honesty. And I think that the two things that I felt were imperative for this initiative was to have coordination, and that's to have churches that are identified, their resources are identified and logged onto a database, and also to be integrated with the municipal management agencies so that they know what to expect from us. Regardless of the event, disasters have several key elements in common. They are unexpected with little or no warning, which is what happened with our flood. Available personnel and emergency services may be overwhelmed initially by demands for their services. And you've heard that it's public safety has been always announcing that we have to have a 72-hour kit. And this is why, because the emergency people, if there's a major disaster, it'll be at least 72 hours before anybody can get to you. So you have to be able to look after yourself and have a kit ready so that you can be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours. Lives, health, and the environment are endangered. To access your community's vulnerability to hazards, it's useful to identify the most common disasters that occur. And that's what I said, you don't plan for something that you'll never see here. Identify possible hazards with the most severe impact. Consider recent and historical impacts. Identify susceptible locations in the community for specific hazards, people, buildings, and infrastructure. And consider what to expect for disruption of services and length of restoration. Back at the table where I have a little display up, you'll see books, and you're welcome to help yourself. Alberta Health Services are one of the organizations that I have connected with, and they have been very generous in sharing their resources with me. I have copies of the Alberta Health Disaster Guide on the back table, and please help yourself. And also, Marvin brought little books on disaster preparedness from the Canadian Bible Society, and please help yourself to those as well. One of the most important things you can do to prepare for a disaster is to form a support group. And this is what we're doing with the Faith Emergency Preparedness Initiative is communities, for example, in Bridgeland is where I have my office in Calgary, and there's 11 different churches of all varying denominations in Bridgeland, and we network together to, one church might have In from the Cold, another might have a food bank, another might have a child daycare. So whatever you do presently is what we capture, and we say, okay, this church is excelling in this area. If we need food, we know exactly where to go to. If we need children to be put in a certain spot, we would know where to take them. So it's capturing what you're already good at and expanding on it. Excuse me. While everybody in a community has a responsibility, churches are especially well positioned to translate emergency preparedness into a meaningful response at the most local of levels. Church networks are broad. Denominational and interdenominational networks span the country and deep. The majority of churches have multiple community-based small groups. Churches have built into them the double mandate of both loving God and also caring for their neighbors. Each church and their congregation members have unique facilities, capabilities, and skills. And in Calgary, the Municipal Management Agency just saw churches as a facility, and that's the normal thing, that they don't look at the people, they don't look at what the people in the churches can actually do. It's still about the facility. And what they do is they come in and they take over the church and they say, okay, you can go and we'll look after it now, thank you very much. And I saw that happening in Calgary. Center Street Church was opened as a reception center. And they were starting to mobilize their own people to help, but pretty soon their people were gone, and the emergency management agencies came over and took over. But if you have a major thing that's going to go on for a long time, there's no way that they're going to be able to sustain that level of involvement. So it will be up to the churches then to say, okay, they are now gone. Usually they only stay for 3 days and then they're gone. But because of the floods devastation, they stayed much longer than normal. And so they were able to keep their people in there. But normally it's 3 days is all that they stay for a disaster. And then it's up to whatever agencies or the community or the church to take over and help where they can, such as a fire. If you have a apartment building go down, they will relocate the people for 3 days, and then they're pretty much on their own. So we have to look at churches as a vital part of the community to help out in whatever area they can. This is the structure that I was given right at the very beginning through Nehemiah. This is Nehemiah's plan, and it's a structure that is very simple, but does take a bit of work to put it into place. You'll see that there's one copy on the table, and I have changed it a little bit because Edmonton, I didn't know if you have a neighbor link in Edmonton or not, but neighbor link in Calgary is part of our structure because they look after the marginalized. So we have the Calgary Emergency Management Agency at the top, and then the advisory council that I spoke of is my advisors on how to fit into their structure. And then there's the Bridges of Love, which is the coordination center. And in Edmonton, if you decide you want to do this, then you could form your own coordination center. And then we have the city broken up into the quadrants, and Edmonton is the same. So we have one church that has taken on the position for each quadrant. And if there is a major disaster, then I would call from the Bridges of Love Coordination Center, I would call one of the quadrants, or maybe all of the quadrants if it's all over the city, and say, okay, we need such and such in the church. And you'll see that the subdivision lead churches in a perfect world, and I can't say we have this in place in Calgary, we're just as far as that line is where we're at. You can have one church in each subdivision, which would make it very easy for the quadrant leads to phone and say, okay, we need so many churches in your subdivision to help out, so that it's a triage of going down the line to see till you get to the local level. And then at the bottom is the community outreach groups, and we're calling them SWAT teams. They're servants with abilities and training, or skills, willing, able, and trained, to help, to be already ready to say, okay, I can do this. I've also developed a skill set. If you want to have your congregation fill out a skill set, you'll know exactly where people can fit into the emergency. And those are all the different areas that I recognize from Katrina, where they helped with shelter, food services, medical services, hygiene, mental and spiritual, reconstruction, and transportation. So the Faith Emergency Preparedness Initiative is a grassroots movement to strengthen community safety and preparedness through increased engagement by congregation members. FEPI brings the public sector and church leaders together to ensure emergency plans more effectively reflect the community's needs and closely align with the Municipal Emergency Management Agency. This is the structure in the middle, the little triangle, that's the Advisory Council. And the verse that I've always used is from Ecclesiastes, though one may be empowered, two can defend themselves, a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. And I can say with the meetings with the public sector, we always start out our meetings with prayer. I've been leading these groups for many years now, and they don't mind, they don't seem to, they don't ever complain about it. So they do know why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I think they see the value in it. You won't be able to see this very well, but there are copies on the back table. This is our church resource assessment form that I ask those churches that want to be to participate to fill out. This is how easy it is to become a partner in this initiative, is just to fill out that form, and that gives me all the information that I need to put into a database so that if we do need to call upon you, I know exactly what you have on hand. And in that form, it gives 3 24-hour contact information numbers so that we don't have any trouble getting hold of people. But it's just catalogs what you're already doing and who to call. And once this form is filled out, then it's up to the churches. I have been giving some sessions on during the pandemic, but each church can formulate their own emergency plans, and this is why we're here today, I think, to help you to start to think about what your church would do in a major disaster. We also have been trying to connect, open doors for connecting with the community, and we have a little magnet, and I actually made some magnets that have the Edmonton emergency numbers on them, and I forgot to put them out. They're in my bag under the table, so remind me and I'll get them out. But I have put the emergency numbers for Edmonton on it, and I don't have a coordination center for Edmonton, so I just put a fictitious number in there. But this just shows you, I heard them talking about the Y book that you're handing out into the communities. And this is a similar initiative that we had a youth group in Calgary that went around and delivered our magnets with the Alberta Health Services manual to their community. They bought 100 magnets, and I made them toques for the kids to wear, and we just had a great evening. It was 20 below in February when we were going around one evening to deliver these magnets, but these kids amazed me. They were from grade 7 to grade 11, and they were so enthusiastic and just enjoyed it, and they understood it. When we finished, we came back to the church for homemade apple pie, and the kids sat around the table and they shared what that meant to them and what they felt the response was. We knocked on doors. We didn't just put them in the mailboxes. We knocked and talked to the people, told them that they were the mustard station of the church around the corner, and that they were wanting to get to know their community so that if there was a major disaster, that they wouldn't be afraid to come to the church, and that's where they would be. That's where the meeting place would be. So it was a great evening, and I think it was a win-win-win for the church, because the kids had a greater sense of outreach. Since the floods, we were put into the position of taking calls for donations, and Samaritan's Purse has been wonderful to pass over people. They were doing just the recovery stage. They weren't doing anything with donations. So Fred Weiss, the president, said, "Marg, why don't you look after donations?" Nobody was doing it at the very start. So we were very fortunate. A lawyer saw what I was doing and said, "There's got to be an easier way." So she found this website in the States called Recovers. And these young people have got a wonderful story. If you want to learn about the Recover site, they've done a TED Talk, and it gives you a real sense of why they started this. They're just young people, but very bright young people. And they developed this website, and they gave it to us free of charge to use because we were in a disaster situation. So people can go in and log on, and they can see exactly, they can put down their donations and all their contact information, and then, or if they have a need, and then I do the matchmaking at my office. And I could tell you wonderful stories that have come out of this, but unfortunately we don't have time. We also started an adoptive family, and we've had, there's a picture on the back table of a lady who was adopted by a church, and the wonderful matchmaking has gone on with families as well. As followers of Christ, we are also called to a greater mission. Connecting with our communities, displaying the lordship of the love of Jesus is our mission, and we desire to be salt and light, demonstrating living proof of a loving God. So that's a lot of information, I know, in a short time, but does anybody have any questions before we go into a discussion?
What would be some of your favorite stories of people being helped out of that situation? What are your favorite stories?
Well, you know, I have been in my office on the phone for most of this time. My husband and I did go out to High River 4 weekends in a row, and so we saw how each week brought a little bit more sense to the place. But we had a few moments that we knew God was at work. The first Saturday we went down, we had our car was just laden with things that people had wanted us to take down to High River, and we had no idea what they wanted or what they needed or what we were going to do with all of this. I had a man donate 40 dozen eggs from a farm up in Olds area. I had another family that donated $500 worth of food from Costco that was like peanut butter, coffee, all sorts of things. I had those boxes of clothes that you saw, the 4 huge boxes of brand new clothing and shoes. And also, what was the fourth thing? There were four big things that were brought anyway for us to take, and I didn't have room in our car to take it all. So I went on a website, and I found a girl that had a van. So I phoned this lady. I didn't know who she was, but I asked if she could help take some of these things down to High River. So she said sure, and she came, and she didn't realize how much stuff we had. In fact, the box of clothing just arrived on the last morning, so I didn't realize we were going to have that much. But she brought a car, but we were able to get it all in. So we got down to High River, and as we drove into it, we were all pale. When we got out of the car, I looked at my husband, and he just looked white as a ghost, and we had no idea of the devastation that was there. We just had no idea. It just took our breath away. We were speechless. So anyway, we were just standing around wondering what to do with the stuff, and this one man came out of the woodwork, and he said, I can take the clothing. He said, we're going to have a neighborhood event that maybe we can use it for that. And the Salvation Army took the food, and so we were getting down so that we had an empty vehicle before we went home, and I was feeling good that the most of the things had been taken. But as we were driving through the town, I got a phone call from this group from Edmonton, and they said, we're from a church in Edmonton, and we have a whole trailer full of clothing that we'd like to leave here, and nobody will take them. And that was the problem. There was nowhere to put all these wonderful donations that people were giving. And so they said, can we leave some with you? And I said, well, we just emptied out our vehicle, but sure, we'll meet you and we'll pile up again. And I had no idea where I was going to take it in Calgary because I have a small office, and I had no idea where I would put it. But anyway, we put it all in. We got it piled as tight as we could. And we were just driving out of Edmonton, or out of High River, and we stopped in this subdivision to take a few pictures. Excuse me. And I don't know if you noticed that umbrella on the video, but that was in the middle of the street on this street. And I said to my husband, let's stop and I'll take a picture of this umbrella. So I got down on my knees, or not on my knees because it was all muddy, but I just kind of crept down, and I was ready to take the picture, and all of a sudden I fell over. And I was just mud from head to toe. Like my phone, everything went into the mud, and I was a mess. So we just stopped, and we went around the corner, and there was a bunch of those tents that you saw, and it was a church from Calgary that was set up making hamburgers for for people. And she came over and she said, "Oh, what happened to you?" And I said, "It wasn't because I was working in the trenches. I fell in the mud." And so she started cleaning me off, and then she said, "Oh, this is too bad." She said, "You need something better than that." So she went and got that white hazmat suit that I had on in one of the pictures, and that I said I looked like I was a hard worker, but I was too clean to have come out of one of the basements, but I was pretty dirty underneath. But after getting that, I went over to take the pictures that I wanted to, and that afternoon there was a little mini tornado in High River. I said they weren't only got a flood, but they had this horrific windstorm that actually took the tents right off of their stands. And so anyway, this lady was running down this street. It was pretty much uninhabited. It was one of the ones that had been hit by the flood quite badly. And so she was running down, and the garbage cans were out in the front, and the lids were flying off, and she was running down the street trying to catch them. And so I just went over casually and I said, "Would you know of anybody who might need some clothes?" I said, "I've got mostly children's clothes in the car." She says, "As a matter of fact, I'm an Anglican priest." And she said, "I'd love to take these things." So she did. She had a car smaller than ours, but she managed to get them all put in. And so she took them, and she's now coming to speak at our event this Saturday. This lady has lost her home, completely gone. She's lost her church, completely gone. And she's now living in the Saddlebrook trailer park that they have put up in Calgary for the people that have lost their homes. So she's going to have a tremendous story to tell, and she has felt it herself, so she'll touch hearts, I'm sure.